Ooh.
Hello everybody at the UK Fan Book Land. I'm talking now to Chris Brookmyre about his latest paperback, Fallen Angel, and his Ambrose Parry book as well, The Art of Dying. Welcome to Chris, and it's been a great pleasure of mine to read your books since I first read Attack of the Rubber Ducks, but you started a lot earlier than that, in '96.
Mm-hmm.
What's it been like for writing for that long?
It's been better than having a normal job, I think. At times I can't believe that it has been as long as it has. I mean, it's 25 years. Or certainly, I was looking forward to what would have been my 25th Edinburgh Book Festival if it hadn't been cancelled. But I think what's been interesting for me is just looking at how my own writing has evolved, because I wrote Quite Ugly One Morning when I was 26, and I don't think, I always wanted to be a writer, and I always envisaged that I would be writing for a long time, but you've no idea how your writing's going to develop and what kind of thing you're going to want to write. I always felt like I was always described as a young writer when I was in my 20s, but actually it's a medium in which you're described as young even when you're 40. So I always kind of thought that I would be learning my trade and that I'd be properly a writer by the time I was in my 40s. But I think you never stop learning. It's a kind of ongoing apprenticeship. And what's been fun for me is thinking that I like to look back and think, what would the writer who was writing Quite Ugly One Morning make of the books I'm writing now? I like to think that although they're more serious, that me at 26 would be quite impressed by some of the material that I've produced in recent years, but equally a part of me is quite envious of the writer that wrote One Fine Day in the Middle of the Night. I could just take a fairly light-hearted, bizarre idea and run with it. I think these days I tend to think a lot more deeply about everything, and that helps in some respects, but also it holds you back. I think you kind of realise that an idea is implausible, so you don't pursue it, whereas back then I would have just written and thought, I don't care, let's just see where the idea takes me.
Is there any ideas in recent past that you've given up on because of that philosophy?
I think it's not so much that there's a big idea that you give up on, it's more like if you're having ideas all the time, I think you're constantly editing and filtering, and the ideas don't get past the first filter if they seem a bit too strange, or if I'm thinking maybe it is that having a notion and the first thing you think about is, well, how would a character react to that, and if you know that psychologically it's implausible, these days I wouldn't pursue it, whereas back then I'd probably just have thought, I don't care whether it's psychologically implausible, let's just see what happens. But it's in the same way, I think you'll learn a lot about yourself if you're writing for this length of time. And I probably take a lot of things a bit more seriously than I used to. Although, having said that, I have just finished a book that is a lot of fun and is probably a bit less serious in tone than many of its recent predecessors.
You have written quite a few unusual titles with a few unusual concepts, but the most unusual one that a lot of people have said is the one you wrote in space.
Places in the Darkness.
Yeah.
I think it would be a toss-up as to whether it was the most unusual. There's a few other candidates in there. Obviously, Bedlam was pretty unusual because that largely took place in a sort of realm of video games and sort of artificial universe, essentially. But certainly, Bedlam was a science fiction novel. Places in the Darkness was a crime novel, and obviously it did take place in space, but I like to think of it as it was a fairly authentically noir novel. You know, it had all of the things you'd expect in a sort of noir crime thriller, and it had a sort of corrupt cop, it had bars, it had bootlegging, it had gang warfare. You know, it did moral, sort of moral dilemmas, and it was essentially, in my mind, it was a buddy cop thriller. That I always wanted to write a buddy cop thriller, and I wanted to write a female buddy cop thriller at that. And so, Places in the Darkness gave me the perfect opportunity to do that, because it was about two people with very different moral positions on law enforcement. One of whom sort of breaks every rule she can, and the other is an absolute stickler for every rule. So it was a lot of fun to write Places in the Darkness, and I would really like, if time allows and the idea comes along, I'd like to write about those characters again.
Talking of moral positions, what is it like writing a period novel and then a modern novel consecutively? And which you find the most easiest to do?
Oh, well, definitely neither of them are easier than the other. They both bring different challenges and different advantages. Obviously, the big advantage that the Ambrose Parry novels bring me is that I don't have to do all the work. You know, I've got a sort of 50-50 split on it. Well, it's not even a 50-50 split, because it is my wife Marissa tends to come up with the story and the theme and all of the historical research. You know, so I obviously I write a lot of it, but it's a collaborative process that draws on our respective areas of expertise. What has been gratifying about it is that for many years with my work, I found I was alternating between really large-scale stories, you know, stories that took place on the sort of grand canvas, and then quite intimate ones. So, for instance, I wrote One Fine Day in the Middle of the Night, and then followed that up with Boiling a Frog, which is a far more sort of small scale story. And I found that if I'm writing the big grand scale thing, I start at some point in the writing, I'll start to kind of pine for writing something more intimate and more just, I suppose, more down to earth. And then when I'm writing the intimate kind of character driven pieces, I start to crave the grand landscape. So it's a way of keeping it fresh to alternate between the two, and this is the same effect, and probably more pronounced, is that if I'm writing about the 19th century, that's full of restrictions. You know, you have to think about things like, if it's past a certain time of day, how dark it is indoors in a time when there's, you know, a little bit of gas lighting, and mostly candles. You know, you're always having to think about the language people use. A phrase you're about to use, you realise that nobody said that for 100 years after the time I'm describing. So it's liberating to then write about the present day, if you've been making all these disciplined considerations about writing in Victorian times. But equally, when you go back to writing about Victorian times, you've got the I suppose the benefit of a world where you don't have to worry about someone being able to call the police using their mobile phone. You know, you don't have to worry about those kind of technological implications that get in the way of your plot. So both of those sort of subgenres have their own advantages and disadvantages, but the thing that's most gratifying about them is that because you're alternating between the two, it keeps it fresh. You know, it's the old cliche of a change is as good as a rest.
Small and intimate is a good description of Fallen Angel. I know it's a while since you've written that now, but if you could tell us a bit more about that, because it's your latest paperback. So.
Yeah, it's the irony is, I like to think of it as a holiday novel. And obviously, I was hoping people would buy it this summer to take on holiday. I suppose they still might, but their holiday is probably going to be in their garden. It's a book about a young Canadian woman who has got a summer job essentially as a nanny, working for a couple who've just recently had their first baby, and she's come over from Toronto, and our first job as nanny is to go on holiday with them to Portugal, where they have a villa. But when she gets there, she becomes obsessed with the secret history of the family that shares the swimming pool. This family have got 2 other villas around the same pool, and she becomes obsessed with them because of the sort of secret history of this family. She's heard of the sort of patriarch of the family, a guy called Max Temple, who was a psychology professor at the University of St Andrews, and he was the reason the family have gathered at the villas for a holiday is because Max has recently died, and it's the first time that Max's widow Celia has had sufficient guilt leverage to get all of the family to gather at these holiday villas. And the reason they haven't been there is also the reason why they have this sort of secret history, and the reason why they're quite famous. Max was famous as a talking head on television debunking conspiracy theories, but the family became famous because in 2002 Max's granddaughter, who was only about 2 years old, went walking away from the family and fell off a cliff into the sea. So it's a book about conspiracy theories. It's a book about how we come up with conspiracy theories when we don't have a satisfactory explanation. And it doesn't mean we don't have any explanation. It's sometimes we're not happy with the explanation that the facts have given us, and we come up with a better one or a more interesting one. And obviously it's a book that's got echoes of the Madeleine McCann disappearance, because it takes place in the Algarve and it's about a child going missing. But it's not my take on the Madeleine McCann case. It's not me imagining what might have happened. It's very much about what it is to be a family that's subject to massive media scrutiny and subject to conspiracy theories and innuendo. And it's about the psychology of conspiracy theories. It's about how we are seduced by conspiracy theories when we don't have a satisfactory answer to a question that's really burning. And I suppose it's kind of, I think we should lay the blame for conspiracy theories partly at our beloved crime fiction, because one of the things that I think we love about conspiracy theory is it gives us a new version of something that we thought we already had the answer to, and we get a buzz about that. If you think you've already got the information about a murder or some great mystery, and then someone comes along and offers you this completely alternative explanation that sounds more exciting, you literally get an endorphin buzz when you hear that. And I think we're used to that feeling of excitement from crime fiction, especially when you get a twist, because the twist in the tale in a good crime story is something that changes the meaning of everything that went before it. And that's what I think that's the pleasure of crime fiction, but it's also what makes us susceptible to conspiracy theories.
When it comes to the twist, in the book, there's a section about moon landings and things. That section gives us a hint to the style of your writing. Why did you include that bit?
Well, I wanted to write about that sort of seductive psychology of conspiracy theories, and to show how a conspiracy theory starts to build up plausibility. But I also wanted to show how someone can take it apart when they've got the right information, and to show why Max became famous. He becomes famous because he's on a chat show, and there's a guy on who's published a book about the moon landing, claiming it's a conspiracy theory. And Max demolishes the guy point for point on live television, and this launches Max's career. But I wanted to show partly how certain conspiracy theories would gain popularity, show how the conspiracy theory can be debunked, but then also demonstrate that despite it all being debunked, the theory just lives on, that the conspiracy theorists never let evidence get in the way of their theory. So, and I chose the moon landing conspiracy theory because it's just fascinating to me that it's one that won't go away. No matter how many times people explain the science behind the conspiracy theories, someone comes back postulating the same theory again and again.
You also did something similar in Rubber Ducks to do with ghosts and things. That was a lot earlier, but I just wondered if you noticed the similarities in the stories there.
Well, certainly. I mean, I think it's one of the things that attracted me when I was writing Attack of the Unsinkable Rubber Ducks. I'm sort of attracted by to me, that there's a similarity between investigating claims of the paranormal and investigating crime. It's about taking the detective's role in it as someone who has to be smart enough to know how the crime and how the deception is being perpetrated. And I thought often the deceptions are really clever when it comes to people given the impression that they've got psychic powers. But people's willingness to believe in it is very, very tenacious. So that appealed to me. I realised when I was reading a lot about conspiracy theories that it kind of works the same way. People often believe them because they want to believe them. They prefer the version of reality that is offered by the conspiracy theory to just ordinary reality. So that's the reason why conspiracy theories tend to be very tenacious. So there was a conscious, I suppose, echo of the same themes. And I'm glad you spotted the comparison because, there's definitely a link between Attack of the Unsinkable Rubber Ducks and Fallen Angel in that respect.
The technicalities of doing like medical stuff is also complicated for you in your Ambrose Parry stuff. How do you find that in comparison to that style?
Well, with something like Fallen Angel, I spent a long time reading about, not so much about conspiracy theories themselves, but about the psychology behind the theories, or about the history of various conspiracy theories down the years. And I sort of constructed a story around that. Same with Attack of the Unsinkable Rubber Ducks. I was fascinated by investigations into the paranormal, and I read every book I could get on the subject. But it's a lot easier for me with the Ambrose Parry novels because I don't have to do any of the research at all. My wife, Marissa, she was doing a master's in the history of medicine a few years ago, and she was researching the subject of James Young Simpson for her dissertation, and that led to all these discussions we had about what a fascinating character Simpson was, and how his discovery of chloroform was very much driven by his humanitarianism and what kind of man he was. He was a very kind of warm person. He was a family man. He was very much unlike the way this sort of Victorian doctor tends to be depicted. So we just talked about how fascinated we were with him, and eventually I must have suggested, I think there's a book in this. Nobody's beaten us to it. Nobody's ever written a novel about the discovery of chloroform, and it kind of grew from there. So Marissa is someone who's been an anaesthetist for 20 years, as well as having done her master's in the history of medicine. So not only is she someone who's studied the subject, she has walked the walk, if you like. She's got a perspective upon the practice of medicine and anaesthetics in particular, which informs her research. She could hand me the same books about the subject, and I wouldn't find the same story that she does. She knows that where the drama lies in certain things to do with obstetrics of the time, how obstetrics and childbirth was carried out at the time. So I'm in this fortunate position that not only does someone else do the research, there's someone who can really interpret the research and come up with stories based on that.
You were saying to me before the talk that you just finished the latest one. I know you were saying that you might struggle to tell us a bit more about it, but
Oh no. My wife and I, Marissa and I, are working on the third Ambrose Parry book just now, but it was the title of it I can't reveal just now. So we are working on it. We've got the plot all sorted out, and it's thoroughly underway. What I have finished is my own solo novel, my latest solo novel, which will be out, I think, next March, all going well, is the current pub date for it. And that's got a provisional title just now of The First Cut. And that's about it's about a 72-year-old woman who spent 25 years in prison and is not long been out of prison. And she's very depressed. She's finding it very hard to readjust to life back in the world, and actually thinking of killing herself. And then one night she sees in a hotel, she sees a photograph, and what she sees in this photograph completely alters the meaning of everything that's happened to her for the past 30 years. Everything that she previously believed about her own story, and it's also a book about exploitation cinema. So it's about the world of making horror movies in the 80s and 90s, and about the myth of a missing horror film, a film that went missing, that was supposedly a cursed movie. The negative went missing, people involved in the film went missing, and it was reputed to have been so terrifying and disturbing that its producers burned the negative in the presence of a priest. So it's about this myth of this really scary horror film that she was involved with, and so it's that's about as much as I can say just now, because it's quite a complex story, but it's also it's kind of my cross between crime fiction and uplit, because it's very much about somebody rediscovering the value of her own life.
Yeah. What other crosses do you think you've written about that you enjoy writing? Of the cross genre things?
Well, cross genres. I don't know. I guess when I wrote Pandemonium, I'm not sure you can call it a cross genre thing, because it was a horror novel and it was technically a science fiction novel, but lots of people assumed it was a crime novel because I had written it. And there was a lot of bemused people at the end, because I think they kept thinking there was going to be some kind of Scooby-Doo type explanation for why there was demons running around. And there wasn't a Scooby-Doo explanation. There was a sort of science fiction horror explanation for it. And it was kind of my love letter to all the horror movies that I'd grown up with. So I grew up during the 80s watching all these slasher movies. And so I was trying to write a story that would echo the feeling of those 80s teen horror movies. So hence Pandemonium. And there's an element of that in the new book as well, because it's about those horror movies, and it's about the sort of exploitation cinema and about video nasties, and about how the Tories tried to ban video nasties and had certain movies banned for best part of 20 years. So yeah, I'm not a like massive horror aficionado, but I do enjoy writing about
it. Was that relevant when you did the video game book as well?
Well, it actually led to the video game book indirectly. The whole way the video game and the book came about was a group of video game developers based in Brighton. One of them read Pandemonium, and they picked up on the fact that Pandemonium was full of video game references. Even at the start of the book, there's a sort of dramatis personae. There's a list of all the characters organised into, instead of cliques or groups, they're organised into sort of gaming clans. And they picked up on all these little in-jokes and references, and as a result, they asked me if I'd work with them in developing a first-person shooter video game. So I'd finished a novel and I had time on my hands, so I said, yeah, I'll I'll have a crack at that. And we met up and we had all these discussions about how we'd all grown up with games. We'd grown up watching, not only watching the games evolve, but watching our relationship with the games evolve, watching what games meant culturally go from something that was very much sort of regarded as geeky and marginalised to something completely mainstream. And I came up with the idea of a game that would encapsulate all of that. The idea of a game that had someone transported into the world of one game, but able to escape from one game into another, so that you could move around and take the weapons from, say, a science fiction shooter into the Second World War, and then into a fantasy realm. And this idea just grew and grew. And when we were discussing how we might create the game, I thought, the best way to do it is I'll go off and write a novel, and that will develop the themes and the characters, and then we'll see how we go on. And while I was writing the novel, they were starting to put the proposal together and start looking for finance. But it turned out, writing a novel takes a lot less time than constructing a game. So it meant that having the book made it a lot easier for them to get the game financed. And then I worked with them again. I wrote the script for the game. Because it's not just a question of writing some of the dialogue. You have to write every last thing. Every grunt of pain in a game has to be scripted by somebody. But it was a huge amount of fun.
Did that involve interest in hacking as well? Because I know you included computers in the later books too.
Yeah, I think I grew up with computers really from the early 80s. I had a ZX Spectrum in about 1982, so I was very much kind of interested in not just gamer culture as it evolved, but I suppose to some extent hacker culture. And by hacker culture, I don't mean people who are sort of breaking into computers and getting passwords. I mean, it's like hacker culture is just people who like kind of getting under the hood of the machine and tinkering with stuff. So I always felt quite a sort of affinity towards that, and I wanted to write about it. Obviously, that led into things like Bedlam, but it meant that when I wrote Want You Gone, which was all about hacking, the hacker in that book, known as Buzzkill, keeps pointing out to Jack Parlebane that he is essentially a hacker. He's got a hacker mentality, and he uses the same tricks in his journalism as hackers use to get to tinker with computers to get passwords out of people. So there was a big crossover for sure, and it's an area I've always been interested in.
Going back to Jack Parlebane series, because that won you the Theakston's Crime of the Year, didn't it? The Parlebane series.
Yeah, it was Black Widow won the Theakston's, and Want You Gone was the next book after Black Widow.
Black Widow was medical based. Did your wife help you with some of the research for that?
Yeah, Marissa has always had a role in that, and Quite Ugly One Morning was actually her idea because she was working at a hospital in Edinburgh at the time, and she was coming home every night telling me about what was going on in the early days of the NHS trusts. And so I came up with the beginnings of an idea, but she came up with a plot, though she was extremely reluctant to get credit for the plot or to be too readily identified with it, because she was still working in Edinburgh hospitals when the book came out. And a plot involving someone clearing beds by murdering the patients was probably not something she wanted to be too readily associated with. But with Black Widow, it was very much inspired by the experience of Marissa and a lot of her female colleagues. It was about the sexism that a lot of women experience in medicine. So I wanted to write about that sexism and how it sort of forces women to choose sometimes between relationship and career or family and career in a way that it doesn't ask the same choice of male doctors. So there was a lot of her sort of, and her colleagues' lived experience poured into Black Widow, a lot of their anger about it. And I think I was aware that male surgeons were always granted a lot of leeway for their sort of tantrums and bad behaviour. But if a female surgeon behaved the same way, we would say, oh, she's a bitch. So I wanted to sort of illustrate that double standard and come up with a character who was formidable. So Diana is quite a scary character. You wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of her, but I wanted to play on that ambiguity as to is she just strong, or is she actually dangerous? Is she a psychopath, or is she good at pretending to be empathetic, because psychopaths are? And it was, I suppose, it derived from the fact that one of my wife's colleagues in anaesthetics used to describe surgeons as clever psychopaths. So I sort of was having a bit of fun with that.
Female protagonists are important in your Ambrose Parry series too. What do you think you've learned about the female protagonists from your Ambrose Parry series?
I've been writing from the point of view of women in quite a lot of novels preceding the Ambrose Parry series. The three Parlebane books most recently had a similar structure, in that half of the book was from Jack's point of view, and the other half of the book would be from the point of view of the woman who was at the heart of the story. In the Dead Girl Walking, it was a part of a young violinist who's joined a rock band, and then Diana in Black Widow, and then Buzzkill in What You Gone. What was different with The Way of All Flesh, it really was a very, very male world that we were writing about. And there was an irony that Marissa was picking up on, the irony in the fact that this was a world of, in the case of James Young Simpson, he was an obstetrician. This was a world of obstetrics and gynecology, and yet it was a world completely dominated by men. So we thought it was particularly important to have a female perspective on that. And also to show that it was a time when women had so few opportunities that we had the sort of upper middle class women still had little to aspire towards other than marrying well and having children. So if you were working class and female, you had very few opportunities open to you. So Marissa was wanting to create a character who would illustrate that, someone who's really intelligent and driven and bright, but she's got very little open to her in terms of improving herself. And it was kind of inspired really by one of the incidents that Marissa read in one of the biographies of James Young Simpson. It was a true incident where some very posh woman came to the door, and the clinic was extremely busy, and the housemaid apparently opened the door, and this woman said, the housemaid said, "We can't let anyone else in, we're already too full today." And this woman said, "Take my name, Dr. Simpson knows me." And the housemaid apparently replied, "Madam, Dr. Simpson knows the Queen," and shut the door. And we just loved this story, and we thought but we had these questions: what would have happened to that housemaid? What would the retribution have been? But what kind of person would do that? And that was the starting point for Sarah, really, as a character. We started from that point, and Marissa constructed the character of Sarah around that anecdote, really. That was like every character just sometimes starts with a moment or a thought or just an image, and that was where Sarah came from.
We've got a few questions out in the audience. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see them. We've got, when is the third Ambrose Parry book out? Well, we are writing it at the moment, so I think we're looking at sort of next summer is when it's likely to come out, because obviously with everything shutting down, a lot of things have been pushed back, and it'll essentially, I think the paperback of The Art of Dying has been pushed back. It was supposed to be coming out this summer, but I think that's going to be next spring. And then the third Ambrose Parry book in hardback will be probably mid to late summer next year. There's questions there about, is it true there'll be a television series with Ambrose Parry? Well, yeah, there's a series in development with a production company, and I think they're working in development with Sky Atlantic, but I don't know where we are with that at the moment. Anything being developed for television just takes years and years to get anywhere.
Could you tell us if there's any ideas about who's going to be playing the characters in that?
No, I mean it's way too early because we're not writing the script. Obviously, someone else is writing the script, so it's a long way down the line. There is a Jack Parlebane series in development as well, and I've seen the script for that is just fantastic. It's the same writer-director who's written a script for Pandemonium, which is also in development, but Pandemonium is in development as a film. The Jack Parlebane thing is in development as a multiple series, really. The writer's got this grand plan for incorporating lots of different Jack Parlebane stories and sort of building his story arc, character arc over several series.
Is there any characters that you would like to go back to that you started your early career with?
Now and again, I'll think about how much fun it was to write certain books. You know, the character of Matt Black in One Fine Day in the Middle of the Night was a lot of fun to write about. But I mean, I'm going to bring Parlebane back sometime in the near future. But it's always the story first. I never think I'm going to write a book about a particular character and then set out to find a story for them. It's always that a story pops into my head, and then I'll see if a particular character suggests themselves for it. I'll do that. I mean, among the characters I most loved writing about was Angelique de Xavier and Zal Inez. Zal was the magician who used sort of conjuring techniques for bank robberies and other amazing feats, and they were both great fun, really enjoyable to write about. But the problem was I kind of gave them a sort of happy ever after ending, and I'm always reluctant to mess with that.
Given the fact that you've said you've just given a happy ever after ending in one series, is that experience stopped you from doing it in your other series too?
No. I mean, the only thing that stopped me, one of the books I'm most asked about writing a sequel to is All Fun and Games Till Somebody Loses an Eye, because it was an interesting group of characters, and the main character of Jane Bell was this sort of grandmother who ends up in the world of espionage. It suggests itself for more adventures, but to me the pleasure of it was having someone who really doesn't belong in the world of espionage chucked in at the deep end. And once she's had that experience, it's not quite as exciting second time around. So I've never had an idea strong enough to want to bring her back. But there's other characters I do feel quite determined to come back to. Alice Blake and Nikki Fix in Places in the Darkness. I do want to write more about them. Because I love the possibilities of writing again about the world of this space station, and obviously we're going to keep writing the Ambrose Parry novels. So Raven and Sarah are going to continue to develop as characters.
We're going to head back to the audience questions now, if you won't mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there's, do you have a police advisor? No, I generally stay away from areas where I have to look for police details. I mean, I don't tend to write police procedural stuff. The one time that I came closest to that was, I suppose, writing Where the Bodies Are Buried. And I did have, there was a police officer that I used to play football with. And I was able to sit down with him and get him to go through the book, and he gave me some tips on some areas where just terminology or procedure. But I think when it comes to police procedure and crime fiction, there's people who do it so well, so that's why I just stay away from it and try and go with my strengths. People always ask about research, and I find that it's always best to write about the stuff that you're already very well versed in.
Just, yeah, if we could have a couple of more audience questions to end on, and then.
We've got a question here about video game. Sounds like isekai, which is a huge thing in anime and manga. Would you write one of those? I don't think. I just don't have time. Actually, I've been asked before to collaborate on like graphic novel, and it just it's. I mean, years ago, Mark Miller was he was asking if I'd be interested in writing for Marvel, and at the time I just thought it's there was just too many other things to get on with. I mean, never say never. That's what's been great about this career is I've had opportunities to do things that were way out with just the basics of writing novel after novel, whether it was working in a video game or seeing my work adapted in other formats, or even things like doing the fun-loving crime writers. That's been probably the best fun I've had in this career.
What's been your favourite song to sing on the fun-loving crime writers circuit?
You know, the great pleasure of it is it can be different in every gig. You know, we can come off stage and think that one particular song worked really well that night. So and we do share the vocal duties around the band. You know, everybody sings something.
What's the most special guest you've had on with them that you've enjoyed singing with?
Well, certainly the most high-profile guest we've ever had was Nicola Sturgeon at Harrogate last year. Nicola Sturgeon came on and did some backing vocals with us, and we've had plenty of other crime writers down the years. I think at some gigs we've had maybe like I think the most we ever had, we must have had about 10 people on stage once at I Write, because we'll always say, if there's any crime writers that we know are in the audience, we'll get them all up on stage.
If you had a song with lots of voices, what's the song you want to sing as a backing vocalist on?
I don't know. I'm usually too busy trying to remember the chords on the guitar. That's partly why we get some other people up to do the backing vocals.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. I think we're probably going to end there.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you again, Alex. And
thank you.
Hope to see you at Harrogate next year when it. I'm assuming it'll all go ahead next year.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah, because I've missed it too.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
See you next year then.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again.
Cheers.